Nobody goes into the Wallowa Mountains in the middle of October expecting to find something alive that shouldn't be. The trails close, the elk hunters pack out, the last of the summer hikers stop calling the ranger station, and the range settles into the particular silence of a place that has decided it's done being visited for another year. Marcus Webb knew that silence better than most. He had been walking into it deliberately every weekend for 3 years, because it was the only quiet that didn't also contain the sound of a phone ringing too late, a voice on the other end telling him that his wife had passed 40 minutes ago and that she had asked for him right up until the moment she couldn't anymore. If this story is capable of finding you tonight, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you believe that some things are found exactly when they need to be, subscribe to this channel before we go any further. Because what Marcus and his dog discovered inside a collapsed hunting shack on a ridge trail in eastern Oregon was not just a life that needed saving. It was the beginning of something that would eventually reach thousands of people who had never set foot in those mountains and bring every one of them to the same place. Marcus Webb was 44 years old, and the people who met him for the first time in the small town of Joseph, Oregon, usually assumed he was a little older, because something about the way he held himself carried a weight that years alone don't account for. He was lean and long-limbed, with a weathered face, light brown eyes behind wire-framed glasses he only wore when no one was watching, and hands that were always busy with something: a piece of rope, a trail marker, a radio battery, as if keeping them still allowed too much room for thought. He had spent 16 years as a Navy SEAL and left the service with a chest of commendations and a single, unhealing wound that had nothing to do with combat. His wife, Claire, had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 11 months into his final deployment, and the nature of his work had made it impossible to get home until it was almost over. He had made it back with 6 days to spare, enough time to hold her hand and read to her and tell her everything he'd stored up over months of silence. And then one morning he woke up and she was gone, and the 6 days became the thing he bargained with endlessly, telling himself they were enough, knowing they were not. He had moved to Joseph 2 years after the funeral, drawn by the mountains the way some men are drawn by water, not for beauty, but for scale. Claire had always talked about Oregon, had kept a photograph of the Wallowas pinned above her desk in their house in Virginia Beach, next to a postcard she'd written him on their 5th anniversary that he now kept in the inside pocket of his trail jacket, the paper soft and worn at the folds from being refolded too many times. He volunteered for the county search and rescue team 3 days after arriving in town, because the alternative was sitting in a rented house with too many windows and not enough noise. His partner in that work was Rex, a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois who had served with Marcus on 2 overseas deployments before a shrapnel injury to his left hip ended both their careers at roughly the same time. Rex was compact and dark-coated, with a face that expressed 2 things: total readiness and mild contempt for whoever was wasting his readiness. He slept across the foot of Marcus's bed with the businesslike posture of a soldier on a cot, and he tracked Marcus through every room of the house with his eyes. When Marcus moved, the way dogs do when they have decided that a specific human is their entire assignment. That particular October morning was the kind that comes once or twice a season in the Wallowas, cold and perfectly clear, the larch trees burning gold against a sky so blue it looked manufactured. Marcus and Rex had been covering the upper section of a trail closed to public use, checking for storm damage after a wet September, when Rex stopped mid-stride and went rigid in the way that meant he had found something the world hadn't yet announced. His nose dropped to the base of a pine, lifted, swung left toward a shallow gully off the marked trail, and then he simply went, without waiting for a command. Because Rex had always treated commands as suggestions when his nose was already certain. Marcus followed, pushing through a stand of wind-stunted brush into a small clearing, where the ruins of an old hunting shack sat rotting into the hillside, its roof mostly collapsed, one wall still standing, with a rusted iron hasp hanging loose. Rex approached the near corner of the collapsed section, sat down with pointed deliberateness, and looked back at Marcus with an expression that translated clearly: "Your turn, I've done the finding." Inside the wreckage, beneath a section of collapsed planking that had formed an accidental lean-to, Marcus found a cardboard box weighted at the corners with stones. The lid was folded shut. He opened it with hands that had diffused explosive devices under gunfire and still trembled now at the thought of what a box left in the wilderness by a human being most likely contained. Inside, wrapped loosely in a dirty flannel shirt, were 3 puppies no more than 3 weeks old, their eyes still sealed shut, their bodies barely larger than his fist, moving in the slow, barely, their way of creatures spending every calorie they had on the single task of continuing to exist. One was brindle, one was pale tan with a dark muzzle, and the third was the color of ash. So still that Marcus held 2 fingers near its nose for a long second before the faint warmth of its breath confirmed it was alive. He did not know yet what they were, some kind of pit bull mix by the shape of their broad, soft heads. He did not know who had left them there, or whether the intention had been abandonment or some desperate, misguided attempt at shelter. What he knew, kneeling on the cold ground with Rex pressing warm against his side, was that 3 things that should not still be alive were, and that the margin by which they remained so was thinner than paper. He called Lena Marsh, the county animal welfare officer, on the trail radio and described what he had. She was 40 miles away and gave him instructions in a calm, practiced voice that told him this was not the first call of this kind she had fielded from this county this year. Warmth first. Keep them against your body. Don't let them sleep too deeply. I'll meet you at the trailhead in 90 minutes. Marcus unbuttoned his trail jacket, laid the flannel-wrapped puppies against his chest, and zipped the jacket back up over them. Rex walked the trail back at a pace calibrated exactly to Marcus's, not rushing, never more than 2 feet ahead, checking back every 50 yards with a kind of patient, professional concern that Marcus had always thought was the most underrated quality in any partner. The brindle puppy stirred against his sternum on the 2nd mile. A small, insistent push of paws against the fabric, then a faint vocalization, more sensation than sound, a vibration he felt in his ribs before he heard it with his ears. Marcus pressed one hand over the outside of his jacket against the shape of them, and felt his breathing change in a way he hadn't expected. Claire had wanted children. They had talked about it in the careful, someday way of 2 people who kept putting a thing off because the life they were living didn't seem to have room for it yet, and then the life stopped having room for anything. The press of those small bodies against his chest did something to him that he would not have been able to explain in words, and he was a man who rarely tried to explain anything in words, so he didn't. He just kept walking. Lena Marsh was waiting at the trailhead in a county truck, a compact woman in her early 50s with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and the brisk efficiency of someone who had been doing hard, necessary work for long enough to have stripped every unnecessary movement from it. She examined the puppies in the truck cab with a penlight and a small scale, murmured a number of things under her breath that were more assessment than conversation, and then told Marcus the ash-colored one was a female and the weakest of the 3, and would need the most attention tonight. She paused before she said the next part, the way people pause when they're deciding whether to spare a person something or give them the truth. She's borderline, she said. We'll do everything we can. Marcus looked at the ash-colored puppy curled in Lena's gloved palm, barely more than a handful of uncertain life, and said only, I'll take them. He had not planned to say that. It arrived complete before he had thought it through, the way certain decisions do when they are less a choice and more a recognition. Lena looked at him over the ash puppy and appeared to be running a quiet calculation about the man in front of her. She had seen people make impulsive claims at trailheads before and not follow through by morning. Something in Marcus's face apparently persuaded her otherwise. She spent 40 minutes in his kitchen that evening showing him how to use a small bottle and a specialized neonatal formula she carried in her truck, how to keep the temperature in the box at a consistent range, how to monitor breathing by watching the rise and fall of a flank no wider than his index finger. Rex sat 3 feet from the box the entire time, watching with the focused stillness of a sentry who has been assigned a post and intends to take it seriously. The first week was a sustained exercise in staying awake and managing fear. Marcus fed them every 2 hours around the clock, learned the particular sound each one made and what it meant, learned that the brindle male was robust and greedy and vocal in his protests. That the tan female was quieter but consistent and seemed to draw energy from proximity to her siblings, and that the ash female, whom he had not yet named because naming her felt like a presumption he hadn't earned, had a way of going too still in the small hours of the night that brought him upright from a doze with his hand already reaching for the box before his eyes were fully open. Rex developed a habit of pressing his chin to the edge of the box and exhaling long, slow breaths over the puppies when the ash one went still, as if administering something he understood they needed better than warmth or formula. Marcus watched this and said nothing about it because there was nothing to say. On the 8th day, he named her Wren, because she was small and gray and made a sound like something barely audible that still filled a room if you were listening. The town of Joseph found out about the puppies the way small towns find out about everything, through the woman who picked up Marcus's supply order at the feed store and mentioned it to the owner, who told 3 people at the diner, who each told 3 more. Nora Calloway appeared on his porch on the 9th day, which was the first morning all 3 puppies had eaten a full feeding without incident, and Marcus stood in his doorway not quite prepared for her. She was 68 years old, tall and angular, with cropped silver hair and eyes the color of the mountains in flat November light, a gray that held depth. She had been a wildlife photographer for 40 years and lived in a cabin 6 miles east of town, and she arrived carrying a canvas bag that contained a proper puppy heating pad, 3 small knitted blankets in different colors, a book on neonatal canine care, and a jar of honey she mentioned was from her own hives, for him, not the dog's. She set everything on the porch table with the no-fuss efficiency of someone delivering supplies to a post that needed them, and then she looked past him at Rex sitting in the hallway and said, "He's been telling everyone they're doing all right, hasn't he?" It was not a question. She came back most mornings that week, staying an hour or 2, sitting in the chair by the window while Marcus slept in short rotations. She had a quality he had rarely encountered and never found in himself, the ability to be present without requiring anything from the room. She did not ask him about his past or fill the silence with reassurance. She simply occupied a corner of the space and let the space be what it was. On the 3rd visit, he told her about Claire without meaning to, the way people tell things to someone who is not asked. He said it simply. His wife had died, and he had not been there when it happened, and he was still deciding whether he was going to forgive himself for that or simply carry it until he couldn't. Nora listened without her expression changing and then said, "I have been taking photographs of things that are going to disappear for 40 years. The ones that matter most are always the ones where you arrive and they're still there." Marcus looked at her and did not say anything. She was quiet for a moment and then added quietly that she had been managing stage 3 lung cancer for 2 years and that she intended to outlast it on sheer stubbornness, but was not entirely certain she would, and that she had decided not to let that uncertainty keep her from showing up places where her hands were useful. 3 weeks after Marcus brought the puppies down from the mountain, all 3 were healthy, eyes open, beginning to move on their own with the stumbling, baffled optimism of creatures discovering legs. Rex had graduated from sentinel to something approaching uncle, tolerating investigative sniffing with the long-suffering patience of a professional managing an internship. Marcus photographed them every morning because Lena had asked for weekly updates, and one morning he sent her a photograph without thinking much about it. Rex lying with his chin on the floor while all 3 puppies climbed across his back. Wren balanced at the very top with an expression of absolute satisfaction. And Lena posted it to the county animal welfare page with a brief caption about the trail rescue. By the end of that week, it had been shared 11,000 times. By the end of the following week, the number was past 60,000. Letters arrived at the county office, then at the ranger station, then somehow at the feed store, where his supply orders were held. People wrote about their own losses, their own dogs, their own mornings when something small had held them together, when nothing large seemed capable of doing it. A veteran in Georgia wrote that he had not laughed in 4 months until he saw a photograph of a Belgian Malinois being used as a climbing structure by 3 puppies who clearly believed that was what he was for. Marcus read every letter at the kitchen table while the puppies slept in their box, and Rex lay across his feet with the reliable weight of a creature who has decided that a specific location is where he is supposed to be. He did not know what to do with 60,000 people caring about something that had happened in a clearing in the mountains on an ordinary Tuesday morning. He thought about Claire, who had been the kind of person who would have known exactly what to do with 60,000 people, who would have answered every letter and organized something and laughed at herself while doing it. He thought about her postcard in his jacket pocket. He thought about the way Wren had pressed against his sternum on the second mile back down the trail, and how that pressure had rearranged something in his chest that he'd assumed was permanently set. Nora came by the afternoon. The number crossed 100,000 and found him standing at the kitchen window, looking at nothing in particular. She set down her canvas bag and looked at the puppies, and then at him. "You know what that is," she said, nodding at the phone on the table. "That's people telling you they're glad you were on that trail." Marcus turned from the window. He was quiet for a moment. "Claire would have done something with it," he said. Nora picked up the phone, looked at the number, set it back down. "So will you," she said, just differently. He did not answer, but something in his face shifted in the way that comes before a decision, rather than after one. By late November, Lena had helped Marcus work through the paperwork to foster all 3 puppies officially, with the 2 stronger ones listed for adoption when the time came, and Wren, the ash female, quietly removed from that list by mutual agreement that neither of them made explicit. Rex appeared entirely satisfied with this outcome and resumed sleeping across the foot of Marcus's bed with the small addition of Wren's preferred position, which was pressed against the back of his knees. Marcus had begun writing back to the letters, 1 or 2 a day, because it turned out he had more to say to strangers than he had expected, and because Claire had always told him that the things he wrote were clearer than the things he said, and she had been right. He also drove twice to the veterans group in Enterprise, both times because Nora had told him directly that she expected him to, and the second time he had talked for 40 minutes straight about a ridge trail in October and a box in the ruins of a shack and what it felt like to carry something that needed to survive back down a mountain, and afterward a man he didn't know had shaken his hand without a word, and that silence had felt like enough. Some things are not found in the places we are told to look. Some of them are found in cleared trails no one is supposed to be using, inside boxes weighted down with stones, wrapped in a dirty flannel shirt, so close to the edge of surviving that the margin is thinner than the paper of a postcard worn soft from years of being carried. Marcus Webb went into the mountains that morning to do a job, and what came back down with him was, in the end, a different version of the understanding he had been refusing since the phone rang too late. That being there is not always the same as being on time, and that some arrivals are not measured in hours but in the willingness to stay once you have shown up. If this story reached you tonight, share it with someone who needs reminding that the smallest things can hold the largest weight. Tell us in the comments what moved you most and which city you're watching from. And if you can, support a rescue organization or a veterans companion animal program near you. Subscribe to this channel, and we will keep finding these stories, the ones that don't announce themselves, that wait in out-of-season clearings for someone to take a different path.